So I get to clap for myself as well, right? I can do that. Hi, my name is Elton, and I work with the Learning and Readiness team of Microsoft. And we've been working on the concept of delivering Microsoft Azure, to deliver OpenEdX on Microsoft Azure. Today, we're here to share the experiences we've gained as part of this delivery. And we're also going to be talking about the thinking behind the designs that we've had. As well as that, we're going to also talk about the tools that we've used. And at the very end of the session, we're going to at least deliver those tools so you too can use them, because that's our purpose here. The intention is, we believe that hosting an enterprise-grade instance of OpenEdX on Microsoft Azure is not only possible, but it can be seamlessly done, right? Plus, I think it makes a lot of financial sense as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's get started. The very first thing I want you to realize here, let's get started here. In this slide, you see this is the architecture of OpenEdX. That's the current architecture of OpenEdX, and there are a couple of things that will stand out. I did a quick check in the edX platform source, and you realize that there's a lot of AWS references in there. I counted, at least when I counted, was 163. Here in the analytics source code, it runs much higher than that, all right? So the first impression you start to get is, does this thing work on Azure to begin with, right? The next thing you want to look at, if you look at the architecture here, you see that there are a lot of components that are used, and they are all exclusively open source components. You don't see components that are coming out of the Microsoft stack. So it begins as to the question, does this thing work on Microsoft Azure? And our answer to that is pretty straightforward. Yes, we believe it works on Microsoft Azure, and we're going to establish how these things are. So first of all, most people don't realize that Azure is an open cloud, and here is a grid that shows the various components that Azure supports. And there are two key concepts I want you to realize. Number one, Azure offers choice and flexibility. So that allows you to choose the various components and have the flexibility to bring various components together to build your solution as well. Here is an additional piece that most people don't realize. Microsoft also offers a very compelling cost model where we support a per minute billing for services, per minute billing, as opposed to hourly or daily billing for resource utilization, as well as we provide a price match commitment on certain services. So everything you see here these are services that will run on the Microsoft Azure cloud. Not only that, we also went ahead and we built a solution. We built a solution with the L&R team that takes advantage of Microsoft openness and flexibility. And that's what we did here. Between December 2016 and 2017, we actually had a full deployment of the, OpenEdX Dogwood version, and we actually upgraded it in March of this year to the latest version, which is Ficus release. And all of the tools and the learnings and everything, we're going to talk about that here in a minute. And moreover, we've made those tools available so whoever else wants to bootstrap such a system will have the tools in his or her hand to do the exact same thing that we did. There is a site that we're hosting right now, openedx.microsoft.com. That's a production site, and we have a number of courses already imported in there. And the same platform is used for employee training as well. We have a version of it that supports using the OpenEdX sites feature. So we're consuming this ourselves. It's not something we're suggesting that you do or that we are not doing ourselves, but rather the exact same tools that we're using, we're making that available for everybody else to jump in and use the exact same thing. All right, so the next thing, before going to a production system, there are a couple of key design considerations. And now we're about to discuss what are some of the things that drove our decision and the way it ended up being, right? So we start with the key design consideration. For a production system, right now, OpenEdX provides full dev stack installs and full stack installations, and these things usually run on single VMs, and they're excellent. You get started in a couple of minutes and you can have a full installation running, but it's a single VM. Now, I don't know if anybody here will run a production system on a single VM. I don't even think that is an advisable thing to do. You don't even want to start with that, because if you lose that VM, your entire application is down. Moreover, I don't know if the single VM will take maybe 1 million requests coming in, right? So how well does it scale? These are things that you have to consider. So we factor that into our calculation here. What we talk about systems that have to be put in production they have to have high availability. They have to have high scalability, options to scale up your system. You also have to consider like disaster recovery. What happens if some data corruption happens, right? What do you do in those cases? So, and in addition to that, what about monitoring? What is your application doing? What exactly are people doing on your system? Is there somebody hacking your system or generating a lot of traffic on it? These are the key considerations that we must put into designing a production system. And because we've designed one, we also had to grapple with those same questions. And here is what we did. Because OpenEdX provides a great way to handle configuration, we decided to go with a major configuration effort. And what we did was to go ahead and fork various repositories that edX provides. So we made our own forks, and then we applied customizations to those forks. And moreover, we developed a brand new, from scratch, deployment utility that allows us to deploy the system very highly configurable, and we can deliver what we want to deliver. For example, we can make customizations to maybe the platform code in our own branch, maybe, and then we can have a deployment that uses that branch value as a parameter, and then we can use source that comes from that branch with your customization in it. So that allows us to make customizations, and once we release the details here, you too can make customizations on our customizations, make that available to the public, and somebody else can take the customizations you made and also make customizations on them. But we make allowance for these things, and they all have been boiled down to parameters that can be plugged into a system, and we just deploy. And the way we do that also is we've made a full advantage of something called the Azure Resource Manager. And that allows, this is how Azure now promotes the concept of deployment. So with the Azure Resource Manager, this construct was introduced back in, I think it was Build 2015. And in that session, what the concept was, describe your entire infrastructure in a JSON file, mapping all of the dependencies, for example, your storage units, your VMs, your application VMs, your network. You can describe every piece of your infrastructure in a JSON format, and you can deploy that JSON format. At the end of it, we're going to provision all of that within 10 minutes. Within 10 minutes, you can have your entire infrastructure provision, and then we layer on the configuration that edX requires, like the playbooks, because that's a two-part process. You provision all your resources, and you apply whatever playbooks you have to it, and then you're done. Applying the playbooks is the longer part of it, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but from the provisioning perspective, 15 minutes, no more than that. You have your full infrastructure provision. Even if you are meant to maybe build an infrastructure that has support for maybe 1 million requests per second, it's a configuration parameter, you pop it in, you get 5, maybe application VMs. If you want more, you can get more. We also allow options for scaling up and scaling down automatically, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So these things give full support for high availability. Not only that, you can have the application automatically scale up for you and also automatically scale down based on your utilization parameters that you put in. So these are options that we have concerning deployment. And all of this is available on Azure. So I'll just talk right to this slide right here. So there are a combination of tools that we're using here. Number one is on Azure. We're deploying to the Azure cloud. Number two, we're using Resource Manager. And then to wrap all of this up, we have also leveraged PowerShell. I don't know how many people use PowerShell here, but PowerShell is just as equipped as your batch session. I will actually argue a little bit more. The reason is, from PowerShell, you can consume your C# libraries. So if you have your C# code or whatever, you can call them directly from PowerShell. But in this case, we're not using C# code here. We're just using ARM templates, and we're using PowerShell, putting the two together and deploying them. And speaking of the Resource Manager, I will just explain a little bit here. Azure provides multiple options for deployment using the Resource Manager. Number one, you can deploy using command line. So they provide a command line interface that you can use to deploy. You type a parameter in there, and you specify your template that you're using, and it's just going to deploy that particular system for you using command line. Two, Azure also provides REST API. So you can actually deploy your entire infrastructure using pure API calls. That is also possible. And also, you can call those same templates using PowerShell, which is what we use. And additionally, Azure provides the option, you can go directly to the Azure portal, and you can provision your entire infrastructure and have that set up as well. Now, the reason we have a preference for maybe the PowerShell option, it allows more customization. And we also are pushing now, because of a simplification effort, we're pushing towards supporting the Azure Management Portal to use that approach, the marketplace. Basically, you need no other tool. You log into your Azure subscription, you click on a link, takes you to the Azure portal, you provision your site, come back a couple of hours, 2 hours actually, and we'll talk about that. 2 hours later, you have a fully functional production-grade OpenEdX installation within 2 hours. So these are the options that we have, and right now we're promoting both the PowerShell option and the marketplace option. So next, I will just describe the process that we go through here. I'll describe the process here. Number one, we expect that you have your Azure subscription, right? You have to have a subscription provision and has some resources in it, support for provisioning multiple VMs in there. And then the second part of the process is your configuration. So we have a set of configurations that the system needs, and we've captured all of them in such a way they're all in one configuration file, one or two configuration file, and with a couple of changes to those configuration files, you can have your customizations done. For example, the entire infrastructure that we built has 2 entry points, and I will show you the architecture in a little bit here. It has 2 entry points, like we only allow front door access to the application using HTTPS, and we also allow for administrative purposes SSH-only access. Now, for security reasons, we've limited the SSH access to only SSH keys. So once you're bootstrapping, we highly recommend you don't use one of the shared keys. You generate your own SSH key because you alone have it. You alone have access to your infrastructure. We also ask that you provide maybe your SSL certificate. These are not things that we can provide for you, right? You have your own domain and you want your SSL certificate that matches that domain. But beyond that, we provide configuration files that tells us which repository to pull your source from and bring in your various customizations. That's what we have in there. Once you have all of the configurations in place, the only thing that's left is to deploy. And the deployment process is as simple as push a button, run a command, passing the parameters that you have in there, basically 2 parameters, your deployment file and the templates that we'll share in a minute here, and that's it. You step back, a couple of minutes later, well, actually 2 hours later, if you're counting hours as minutes, which is like 120 minutes anyway, that counts to a full stamp that is set up. And we call it a stamp because it's like a cluster setup where everything is contained in one unit, which is the resource manager, and all of the resources you need will be in that particular unit. So in this next slide, I just talk about what the deployment process looks like. This is just an overview of the process. So we start with provisioning resources using an ARM template that we'll share here in a minute. With the ARM template, you have all the description of all of the resources that you need for your entire cluster. That takes about 10, 15 minutes, no more than that, and then you're done. Next, as part of the provisioning process, we also provision a jump box. It's just a utility machine that you use for administrative purposes. You can log into the box, and you have access to the rest of the resources in your cluster. And now here is one important part of this, because this comes from a security focus. Linux machines they're very powerful, and if you don't lock them down sufficiently, you're going to have a security nightmare on your hands, right? So what we've done is we've limited access to all of the resources within your cluster, and the only entry point for administrative purposes is through your jump box. And you can only access that through your SSH key. From the jump box, we use it to go ahead and install the databases, and we apply the edX configurations to those databases as part of the process. That usually takes about maybe an hour, maybe 30, 45 minutes, and it's done. And then we have the VMSS. This is what we call the virtual machine skill set. That's what Azure provides. And how it works is you hand configuration for one VM, and that VM now can be multiplied into like 10 or 15, depending on what your need is. So if you need a cluster that has 200 front ends, in your template, you specify 200 front ends, and it will provision 200 front ends within the 15 minutes. If you need less, you take less. Moreover, you have options to say, I want to use auto-scaling. There is a feature with the VMSS called auto-scaling, where with auto-scaling, you can specify, here's the minimum number of VMs I want at any time in my cluster. So for example, I want to start a production cluster with maybe 3 front ends, but based on requests coming into the site, I want to scale up to 25, as much as 25, right? All of that is set in configurations, and we have those files available. You can make those changes, and the system takes care of all of that for you. So the VMSS will be provisioned at the very beginning of the process, but it will wait until the databases are installed, because the way the application works, the front end depends on the back end. So the application doesn't really bootstrap correctly until the backends are available because they have to read certain things from the databases and they have to write certain things to the databases. So our deployment process actually puts that into a pipeline, and we set up the dependency such that the VMSS will wait until the backends are done. And once they're done, then the bootstrap for the front end starts. That takes about 45 to an hour, and then it's done. So combined, no more than 2 hours, or total of, on average, I've seen maybe 105 minutes on average, once you have your configurations in place. That's how long it takes to go from zero in your hand to a fully functional production system. And that is something critical that we want to establish here. So that's what we have concerning the deployment process. Next up, this is what we actually deliver. This is an architecture of the system, the cluster that we deliver for you. And within that cluster, a couple of key components I'd just like to call out here. Number one, you see the dotted lines around there? That's a virtual network, and it's a private network, so nobody has access. Those machines don't even have a public-facing IP, so nobody can access them. It's just not possible. The only machines with access to public endpoints would be like your jump box, which we just talked about. And then you have a load balancer traffic manager that allows us, for example, in a production system, you're going to have one update today, and maybe tomorrow you want to have another update. So we allow you to bootstrap brand new virtual IPs and put machines behind them in a load balancer and then swap them in place. The swap itself takes about maybe 10 seconds, and you can actually upgrade your installation. So I tell you this because we had to use it going from Dogwood version to Ficus. We use this. So this is not something that we're suggesting that you do that we haven't done ourselves. We actually use this stuff. So what you have with the front ends is you have public IPs on them, and that's how you access the application. So your www. Whatever your domain is, that's where they will come in from. And then your jump box for administrative purposes and all SSH logging in there, and you can have access to your MySQL cluster. We have a MySQL cluster that is already configured for you. That's available. We also have a Mongo replica set that is already configured for you. So none of this stuff you have to do. It's all part of the configuration system that are displayed in the previous slide right here. You see the second line where you have the provisioning of the backends? That's where all of that happens. We create them, we configure them, and then they're ready to go. Not only that, we talk about disaster recovery as well. We also do automatic by configuration. You can specify the frequency of your backups. So, but by default, we do that for you. We put in defaults, and so even if you don't think about it, you have a backup for your system. You don't have to think much about it. Your system is going to be backed up at least once daily or maybe multiple times during a day. So you have that data available. So here is the cluster that we define and we deliver for you, and that's what you get out at the very end of it. Next, that is a big question. How do I get started on this, right? And this is the endpoint that we've given here. We try to use this as a landing page for you. We try to capture as much documentation as is possible on that site, because from that site, you can now have access. For example, we have a PDF documentation there that describes all of the various processes that you have to go through to build maybe the inputs that you need. Also, we give you documentation, video documentation, so we can actually walk you through what the process is. Here is how to get this. Here is how to get that. We have 3 video links on that site as well, and this is on GitHub. So from here now, with that link, you also have access to there are 2 deployment types that we put in there. Number one, to deploy using the Azure Management Portal through the marketplace. Once you click on the link, it gives you a page that has various inputs on it, and then you can now provision your cluster, put in parameters in there, and then provision your cluster. So that's how this entire process runs. And one key thing I would like to call out is that our goal right now, this is version 2 of it. We've had to use it, and there were some pain points that we had to deal with, so this is a version 2. The next part that we're trying to work on is to simplify the process, because there are a little bit of parameters that we need. Some of them we cannot get away from. For example, if you want to use your custom theming repository, for example, because that's the most highly requested item that we've had so far. Somebody has his own theme, and he wants to use his theme. It comes down to a configuration update. You point to your theming repository, and we will deploy it for you. Or maybe you have some customizations in your application, where the application works. That's another input parameter, and these things are all available, and you can just make those changes in there. And basically, that's what we wanted to cover today, and we can start taking the questions, and we can dig deeper. Great. Go ahead.
Do you use
Oh, hang on.
Do you use Cosmos DB for Mongo?
No, right now we don't. And you realize that it wasn't, I think it was at the recent Build Conference, 2017. That's when they actually started to publish this. And when we started this work, there was even a beta version of the MySQL available, MySQL and Cosmos. So that's part of our version 3 that we're trying to work on because we want to further simplify the process where we can utilize Cosmos DB for a Mongo setup, and then the Azure MySQL database, we want to use that as well. Right now, what we do is, on the fly, we provision the machine, and we set all of that up for you. And that's what we have. Yep. Somebody else had a question? Yep. Yep.
Let's say that I have my own development because I have lots of BlockX and some customizations, and I have to put this on GitHub so that you then download there, right? Should we have also a pre-production cloud instance so that I can try my developments on something else? How do you see this? How
You can. So the way it works right now, the resource manager captures all of your resources. So with a single cloud, what we do for ourselves, we use the same templates and we deploy multiple clouds. So maybe one cloud will have maybe one VM in it, front-end VM. That's what we provision in there. For a production cloud, we have much more VMs in there. So we do both of them, right? So in your case, yes, you can do that. You just deploy it, and you have a scaled-down version of it, and you can use that for your test environment. And for your production environment, you can change the parameters that you deploy with. And that's the key thing I want to establish here. It's very highly configurable. The biggest debate that we've had is, how many of these parameters do we expose to users? That was the big conversation as part of our design consideration. Because there's so much of this thing that you can configure. There's so much of it that you can change. But we had to limit and say, we can give you some reasonable defaults to work with. And once you have mastered the process, you can go in for deeper integrations. Like you're saying, you have your source, maybe some customizations in a different repository. It's a config change. You specify which repository you want. There are like, I think, 5 repositories that we use: edX platform, edX configuration, those various repositories. You can just point to them and say, here is the repository I want to use. Here is the version of that repository, meaning the branch that I want to use, and deploy this. And it's going to deploy that for you. If you don't like it, go right back into Azure Portal and just hit delete. It will delete all of the resources for you because it's all contained in a single unit.
Question. Let's say that in 2 years I want to move out of this cloud. Is there a way to export data?
So by default, Mongo, we don't provide that tool out of the box. There are some inherent risks. We did a migration as well, the migration from Dogwood to Ficus. We did that as well. But we haven't released that because there are a number of nuances involved in the process. So, and it's a bit risky, but it is possible. There are tools available like the database. We actually provide you the backup. So already, by default, you already have backups that you can replay in other environments or restore in other environments, and you can bootstrap those environments with the data from there. So it is possible. Okay.
You said that currently you're not able to do SSL certificates automatically. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
So currently you're not able to do SSL certificates automatically. Have you thought about using Let's Encrypt?
No, for the SSL certificate, we are not going to create your SSL certificate. We have a default SSL certificate, so if you want to try it out, you can start out with that. But here's the problem. We don't know your domain of your site. So it's not technically possible for us to provision your SSL certificate. You have to buy your certificate from your certificate authority and then use that as an input parameter. That way, for example, you have a site called maybe y.com. I don't know who has the domain y.com. You have your certificate that supports y.com, and you specify as an input parameter, say, here is the certificate I want my application servers to use. Once you're accessing the site on HTTPS, because the domain matches, then it's going to work. Otherwise, it will complain you have invalid certificate on the site.
But you could also use the domain name as an input variable and use Let's Encrypt certbot to automatically get a verified SSL certificate for that.
We could. And that's something that we may have to consider. I'm not sure if we're at the point we have the request to do that, but that's something to factor into the equation.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry if I'm asking this again because, so what you just said now, if you're moving from Dogwood to Ficus, if you move to another, so if we deploy something once and we want to update our ARIX platform base, would that be supported as a part of your solution, like the migration of data?
So data migration is a very difficult thing because of the inherent risks involved. Okay, so right now we're not trying to insert ourselves in that equation. There are some things that we can suggest to you, right? But it is very difficult. So in our case, we had to do a lot of hand-holding to get that. It's a whole team effort that was involved in that, and the validations and everything else, because you have to maintain data integrity while you do this. And moreover, we set a goal for ourselves. We have full availability throughout the deployment. So our site never went down while we migrated. We migrated fully while the site was still running. We had to do that. That was a high bar we set for ourselves. Would that work for your case? I'm not quite sure, right? So that's the reason why we're not even the guys, and there's a whole team effort here that work towards that. They're not here to maybe talk about that. Maybe in a subsequent session we can do that. But right now the thing is, for data migration, you're mostly left on your own. There are some suggestions we can give to you to do that. For example, backing up your databases and restoring it. In the case of the Mongo setup, you can add another replica into it, right? And you can have a backup and stand up your cluster doing that and move them from maybe one OS to another version of the OS. You could do things like that. Yep, go ahead.
So after using your template to set up the cluster and it's ready and up and running, how do I then plug in my continuous integration pipeline? Say if I'm managing it with Circle CI, how do I then plug in that to make sure that I'm able to update?
This is what we call the upgrade path, right? And this is part of our effort at simplification. We haven't exposed that yet, right? But it's available. We're working on that, and we ourselves are using it. Our deployment process looks like this. We go in and we bootstrap a brand new set of front ends, and we put them in a VIP, right, in a load balancer, and then we do our validations against them. Once we have validated everything is good, we simply tell let me just, is there a way to get the slides back and I can speak to it? Whoever's in the control room, can we switch back to the slides? Okay, so if you see in the slide here, that's the reason why we have those two components out there outside of the cluster that are available. You have the load balancer, where you have your multiple VMs that are represented there. There are load balance in there. And then you have the traffic manager. Traffic manager is basically an Azure construct for DNS rerouting. So basically, with one command, I can switch from one load balancer to another load balancer that has the latest updates. For example, at one point in time in our production system, we had a load balancer that had Dogwood bits, front ends with Dogwood. And then we deployed the Ficus bits. They were all running together at the same time, but users will only see the Dogwood version. Once we were satisfied with all of the requirements, we switched using the traffic manager, and then we switched over, and then we tore down the rest of the other machines. We just disposed of them because we didn't need them anymore. So that's how you will go forward with regular updates. So your Circle CI you're using, you're most probably going to hook up into a full deployment. And the way ARM works, it does what we call catch-up upgrades. So for example, if you've already deployed a component, it smartly looks in there and says, this component is already deployed, so therefore I'm not going to do anything more. So in order to get the various customizations you need in there, Azure provides something called the script extension, the custom script extension. It's not in the visual here, but through the custom script extension, that's where you can run your upgrade commands. So for example, you want to run certain playbooks, you will call them through there. If you want to provision brand new machines and have them do certain things, that's how you'll do those things. So upgrade approach is possible, and we'll most probably be coming with a fuller solution around there, at least something that third party can use, because we are currently using that for our deployments. I think right before coming here, we have some pending upgrades. We go through them all the time. As we see a change that we need to deploy, we deploy them. So that's what we're using, and then we have to package it in a way that third parties can use them as well. So that's the goal. That will be our version 3, and just keep tracking the GitHub site, the link that we give, and we'll have those available in there as well. Yep.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Did you say that the edX platform repository is one of the things that can be passed into your configuration?
That is correct.
So then are you tied to any specific version of OpenEdX, or how do you regulate that? If I send you, as part of my configuration, a link to a repository that is not, let's say it's not Ficus, it's you know, Eucalyptus.
Yep.
You handle that the same way?
It's just a configuration parameter. Here is where we started. We started with Dogwood. And I don't know if I can really talk about this just in a little. I'm looking at the managers here. But the plan initially was to go to Eucalyptus, not even Ficus, right? And we had tested the capability to both deploy Dogwood, Eucalyptus, and Ficus. The reason why I went ahead with this design was it's very possible to have any platform deployed, okay? Once you have the correct inputs and the parameters, you point to the right places, it should take care of that. So it's very flexible. It will deploy Dogwood because we had to deploy Dogwood. It will deploy Eucalyptus because we tested against Eucalyptus, even though we didn't release on Eucalyptus, but it will definitely deploy Ficus because that's what we do right now. So it will handle it.
Sorry, I'll shut up after this.
Yep.
Any specific version of Ficus or Eucalyptus or Dogwood, or all of them?
Is
you know
version agnostic. Let's call it that.
Okay.
The only input we need is tell me where your repository is, and we point to the playbooks against that repository. It doesn't matter what version is on. We're going to execute those playbooks. That's it. Okay. Excellent. And of course, because Ficus required Ubuntu 16.04, again, another configuration parameter. You specify which OS of Ubuntu you want, you get it. Yep, there's someone here.
My question is, where do you run the other persistent service that OpenEdX use, like Elasticsearch and Memcache? Because on the architecture that you displayed, you have the Mongo and MySQL, and then the application services.
So right now, and this is a conversation we're having as well. That's a design change that we're contemplating right now. Right now, Elasticsearch is applied to one of our backend databases, right? That's where it's set right now. But we now want to leverage the search capabilities of OpenEdX. So now we're contemplating spinning it off as a separate service. That's a conversation we're having right now. Here's the great thing. And all of our work is done right in those GitHub repositories. Once those designs are done, the template is made available. We're going to deploy from those templates. And if you deploy from the template, you get exactly what we got. Seems like we've exhausted the questions. And that's fine, because the effort here, we're driving towards simplicity. And I think our version 3 is going to be much simpler than what it is now. You know, right now, as it is, you have a number of input parameters. We're trying to really compress them as much as possible, and huge debates, because we want a highly configurable system. We want you to be able to change whatever you want to change and still have the deployment system deliver that for you. But at the same time, if you put too much in there, too much becomes a problem. But if you put too little, that becomes very restrictive in what you can do. So we have to find this fine balance and then improve on our tools, you know, various pieces in there. Those are the things that we're targeting. Those are the things that we're driving right now. Are we running out of time? No, there's somebody else coming up.
So given this is a relatively new journey that you guys are going on, what kind of support would you give to anyone who's going to set on this journey with you?
Yeah, that is a catch-99 situation right there. Now, so my skip level manager is here. She's going to be talking a little, I think tomorrow, she's going to be talking about that, about, you know, something within something around our partner play. So we do have a partner play. So right now we don't openly support, just provide open support for anybody who wants to do anything with these templates. That's why we try to provide as much documentation as possible, and moreover, simplify to the point where, I mean, how many people here have a problem typing up on a Word document? Right? Just to type a couple of words on a Word document. It's pretty simple. You start up the app and you just start typing. That's how simple we want this cluster setup to be. And that's the goal. That's what we're driving towards. Everywhere we can simplify so that you don't have that extra question. Of course, you may have a question or something. So we provide a GitHub, and if there is a way to contact us through there, we can provide that. And of course, I didn't tell you, but my alias was on the first screen of my presentation. So if you caught that, I'm putting my neck on the line here, right? Just what you do. And we can display it. I can just provide it right now. And I'm hanging myself here. I understand that, right? I understand that, but I agree with your question here. Let's just do this, and I'll just provide it for a couple of seconds here. Just preface the subject with maybe OpenEdX conference, whatever, right? And then so I would know, because guess what? We all use filter rules, believe it or not. So I'll have a filter rule that will point your email to come to a certain place, and then we'll respond to them within reasonable time. But besides that, the focus is, can you do this with minimal intervention? That's the goal. If we can simplify it sufficiently and get you on your way so you don't have to depend on somebody else to get it done for you, that's where we wanted to go. Okay? That was the last question. All right.
And the last session, so thank you.
Yep, thank you.